Hello. Today's class is sponsored by the Myaskovsky family in the memory of Tzudik Ben Lev, Anatoly Rabbe, who just passed away. And this class should be for a merit for his neshama to have an aliyah in Shemayim. And not only this class, but all classes for the Minalpin Jewish Connection for the following month are in the merit, should be in the merit for Anatoly Rabbe, and we thank very much for the Myaskovsky family for sponsoring for the entire month. I was just at the funeral. I didn't know him personally, but what they said about him was unbelievable. A man who survived the Holocaust, his entire family, I think they said he had 13 siblings. They were all killed except for himself, and he went to he said he lived in Moldova after and later in the United States, and he raised a family, raised a Jewish family. I'm privileged to know Gedalia very well, a Mavakesh, somebody who wants to study Torah and grow closer to Hashem, and you could tell that came from his grandparents, from his upbringing and his parents. And the Satmar Rebbe once said, someone asked the Satmar Rebbe to give him a blessing, and the Satmar Rebbe says, if you want to get a blessing from somebody, get a blessing from someone who has a tattoo on their arm and still puts on tefillin. Meaning, if somebody could go through the concentration camps and still believe in God, then that's a type of person that you should get a blessing from, a very holy person. And Gedalia was telling me, even at the end of his life, when his grandfather had dementia, he still wanted to hear the shofar and put tefillin on him, and was still very connected to Hashem, even though the rest of his mind wasn't working well. So all of these classes over the next month should serve as Le'ilei Nishmaso, for a merit for his soul to have an aliyah in Shemayim. Okay, so we are learning the Mesilas Yesharim. We're almost done. We are on chapter 26, which is the trait of Kedusha, the trait of holiness. So we learned all of the traits up until now, and we learned that holiness is the last trait which the Ramchal speaks about, the highest level that he talks about in his book. And he says that holiness means that a person is so dedicated to Hashem that everything he does becomes sanctified, even the mundane activities that he does. And now he's going to describe that. It's what the rabbis say, somebody who brings presents to a Torah scholar, it's like that he offered bikurim, like he offered the first fruits in the temple. When it says, fill the throats of the Torah scholars, wine in place of the libations in the temple. When you give wine to a Torah scholar, it's like you gave wine and offered it in the temple, in the holy temple in Jerusalem. Now this doesn't mean, Chas Shalom, that Torah scholars, you just have to feed them and they're eating all day. That's not what it's talking about. Like you want to, feed them, feed Torah scholars like a glutton, like someone who goes to Old Country Buffet and is stuffing themselves. That's not what it means. It has to do with what we mentioned before. Torah scholars, holy Torah scholars, in their ways and everything they do, they are literally like the temple and the altar. Since they've sanctified themselves to such a point, bringing something to a Torah scholar for him to use is as if you would bring it to the temple, because they have this level of kedusha, of holiness. So literally everything that you bring to them, it's like you're bringing to the temple. It's a very big mitzvah to help Torah scholars, to give money to Torah scholars, to support Torah, but even just giving them food and drink. Why? And why is a Torah scholar literally like the temple? Because God's presence rests on a Torah scholar the same way that it rested in the temple. The temple, people go to the Western Wall, which is just a remnant of the retaining wall of the temple, and people feel the kedusha and the holiness. When you would go into the temple, God's presence was there more than anywhere else in the world. You could feel God, spiritually feel God. So the Ramchal is saying here that a Torah scholar, someone who has this level of kedusha, of holiness, is literally like the temple and literally has God's presence dwelling with him. So everything he does, even the mundane acts of eating and drinking, becomes sanctified. V'hinei, when you bring something to them, it's like you bring it on the altar. And when you give them drink, it's like you're pouring libations in the holes of the altar. So since they are on this level of holiness, anything that they do and anything that they use that causes those items to be sanctified. You have a bottle of wine. It's just a bottle of wine. It doesn't have any inherent sanctity. But if you give it to a Torah scholar, he is mekadesh it. He actually infuses that bottle of wine with sanctity. The rabbis already said, when Yaakov Avinu went to sleep, there were several rocks, but they all joined together to become one rock while he was sleeping, because they all wanted to, quote unquote, wanted to have the merit of having Yaakov Avinu's head rest on it, on them, on it. That's the idea, that there is kedusha, there is holiness infused to normal, mundane objects that Torah scholars use. Klal shel davar. This is the general rule. Inyan hakadusha hu shia adam davik kol kach ve'loikav ad shebeshum ma'isa asher yaseh lo yipard v'lo yozuz mimani yisbarach. Holiness means that a person is so connected to Hashem, he cleaves to his God, ad shebeshum ma'isa asher yaseh lo yipard v'lo yozuz mimani yisbarach, until that any action that he does not leave Hashem. He is always with Hashem. Even when he's doing mundane acts, he's sitting at a red light, he's still with Hashem. Ad sheyaisi yis'ala hadvarim hagashmiyim asher yishamshu le'echad metashmishav b'ma shehu mishtamish b'hem b'ma sheyaridhu mitvekuso u'ma'asu b'tashmashu midvarim gashmiyim. And when he uses the physical world, instead of going down, one would think you're involved in the physical world, you go down a level, because you're not involved in the spiritual world. On the contrary, someone who has the midah of Kedusha, he sanctifies the physical world. So he actually infuses the physical world with holiness and elevates it, as opposed to being drawn down by it. Most people, when they're involved in right, we just had Yom Tov, we had all these amazing days of Sukkot, where we were uplifted because of Sukkot. So now we're involved, we go back to work, whatever else we have to do, our mundane activities, our usual weekday activities, and we're drawn down. We don't feel as holy. So we're drawn down by the physical world. However, the person who has the midah of Kedusha is the opposite. He actually infuses and elevates the world around him, as opposed to being drawn down by it. Ve'amnam. Zebios sichlo v'daito kavum tamid b'kedulaso yisbarach. This is when a person, now how do you get to this midah of Kedusha? It's not so easy. We mentioned that you have to have all of the other, all of the 25 chapters until now, you have to have mastered them. So we're not talking about, this doesn't happen overnight. This takes a lifetime of work. But a person has the midah of Kedusha when he is always contemplating the greatness of God, V'romamuso, Kedushaso, and his loftiness and his holiness. So it is like that he's connected to the angels when he's still in this world. He's literal. Someone who has the midah of Kedusha is an angel on earth. And we already said that person can't do it by himself. We said that a person cannot achieve the midah of Kedusha, of holiness, by himself. So how does a person get it? So we said that first he has to achieve all of the traits up till now, so all the 25 chapters from Zehirus, which was the first trait, until Yiras Chet, which was a fear of sin. And with that he'll come into the holy, and he'll be successful. Oh, so before that, after a person achieves all of those traits up until Kedusha, Hashem takes him the rest of the way. So he has to try on his own and make the effort to get to the level of Kedusha, but in the end of the day, it only comes from Hashem. And this is like everything else in life. We can only try as much as we can, but to really be successful, we need Hashem to take us the rest of the way. So that's what it is here. A person on his own has to achieve all of these traits. It's really not on his own, because even Hashem will help you with those traits if you make an effort. But getting Kedusha, getting holiness, there's nothing, you can't do it on your own. That has to be from Hashem, and you'll be successful. If you don't have the first traits before Kedusha, you're like a stranger and someone who is deficient. It says a stranger cannot sacrifice in the temple. After a person makes all these preparations, that he cleaves to Hashem with love and a depth of fear of Him, and understands His greatness, he will detach himself When a person constantly contemplates the greatness of God and loving Hashem and fearing Hashem, he detaches himself little by little from the physical world. And with all of his actions and all of his deeds, he starts to cleave to Hashem, to the truth. Until he makes all these efforts. A person, he's trying to achieve kedusha. He's constantly contemplating about Hashem and thinking about the greatness of God until the ruach of Hashem, the spirit of God, descends upon him and dwells with him. Like Hashem does to all of his holy people. He'll be literally like an angel. So that means all of his actions, once he's like an angel, all of his actions become like sacrifices and holy avoda, which was done, the holy avoda which was done in the temple. How do you get kedusha? You have to separate yourself. Va'iyun, meaning separate yourself from physical things, physicality. Now again, this is talking to people that are on a very high level. Some of us have, most of us, I would say, have trouble just separating ourselves from sins, speaking Lashon Hara and doing other sins. So this is talking about a person, he doesn't sin at all, and not only that, he's like clean from anything that could ever lead him to a sin. So now we're talking about what's the next step, is totally detaching yourself, I shouldn't say totally, to a great degree, detaching yourself from the physical. So many of us are not up to that yet. Maybe some are. And a person has to achieve this, investigate in depth the secrets of how Hashem operates the world, and the secrets of creation, and knowledge of Hashem's loftiness, His greatness, and His praises, so now we're talking about and he says, once he does this, and he has this dveikus, then all of his actions will be sanctified, and he will have his thoughts purified, and his thoughts will sanctify all of his actions. And he says that's just like the Kohen. The Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen who did the service in the temple, they would slaughter an animal, and they would collect its blood, and then they would spritz the blood on the altar, and all of those things that the Kohen did, the Kohen had to have the right intent, the spiritual thoughts. He says the person who is kadosh, is holy, he has these spiritual thoughts all the time about the lowly world. So even when he's walking around in the mundane world, not doing service in the temple, he has the status of a Kohen. It's like the Kohen who's doing the status in the temple. And he says, without this, and right, and through that loftiness, he's going to draw down the blessings of Hashem. And he says, without this, it's impossible to get to this great level. You'll be a regular physical person like everybody else. What helps to get to this attribute of Kedusha is seclusion and separating oneself. We know the great rabbis of Vilna Gaon, they would seclude themselves, and they would go into Gullus and contemplate and separate themselves from the physical world. By separating himself and by reducing the things that might distract him in the physical world, he or she their soul will be able to overcome and cleave to Hashem. Okay, sounds very difficult. Now what detracts a person from this attribute? It's having a incorrect hashkafa, not having the correct ideas of the Torah and of Hashem, and being around people. Because when you're around physicality, the physicality will awaken the physicality amongst you. So when you're with people, then just like hanging out with your friends all the time, then that is not going to be conducive to developing the midah, the attribute of kedusha, and the soul will be trapped. Ach behiparda mehem, but when you separate from them, v'hishar levad, and you stay by yourself, v'yachan atzmo al hashras hakedushas, when you prepare yourself for revelation of sanctity, hine b'derech shirotza leilech ba yolichuhu, the way you want to go, Hashem will help you. So if you separate and try to become holy, Hashem will help you. Be'ezer haloki, asher yutan bolo, tisgaber nafshabo, utanatz usnasach asagufonios, v'tidavik b'kedushas yizbarach, v'tushlam bo. And with the help of Hashem, your soul will overcome the physicality and you'll be successful. And you will cleave to the Kedusha of Hashem. Now, I just want to be clear, when he's talking about separating oneself and not hanging out with people, we're talking about people here that are on a very, very, very high spiritual level. Right? We're not talking about regular people. I would imagine anyone listening to this, again, I don't know everyone listening to this, but most people I know, I wouldn't suggest this as a practical thing. At least myself, I can speak to myself, I'm still in the beginning stages of this book, not really past chapter Zrizus and Zehirus, chapter 9, because if you have the first two midas, Zehirus and Zrizus, that means you never sin ever. So those are the first two steps. We're on that's chapter 11, we're on chapter 25, so we're talking about really holy people here. So I wouldn't recommend, saying, oh, I heard this class by Rabbi Rosenthal, and he told me not to hang out with people anymore. That's not what I'm saying. It's important for us to know that there are such people that exist, and this is how they got there. And from that, you'll go to even a higher level. Now, after you get Kedusha, that's the highest level that the Ramchal talks about in this book, but there's another level after that. And that's Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. That means Hashem actually sends you messages. It's not as clear as prophecy. The difference between Ruach HaKodesh and prophecy we spoke about in the Derech Hashem class, which is starting again this Wednesday. If anyone wants to listen, they can contact me. But after a person gets Kedusha, then he gets Ruach HaKodesh. He gets divine inspiration where Hashem actually speaks to him. Shekvar Tagia Haskalos Lios L'mayla Michal Kanosh, and he becomes above. He's not bound by regular laws of being a human. And he gets to such a high spiritual level that he already has the keys to be able to resurrect the dead. Someone can be so holy that he's able to bring the dead back to life. Elijah was able to do this. Elisha the prophet. And how were they able to do it? It's because of the great closeness that they had to Hashem. Shebiyos, who Yisbarach Shmo Mekor HaChaim, since God is the source of life. Hanosin Chaim L'chol Chai, He gives life to everything. As the rabbi said, Shlosha Maftechos Lo Nimseru B'yad Shliach. 3 keys were not given to an agent. Maftech Tchias Amesim. And one of them is the keys to resurrecting the dead. If a person is on such a high level that he can resurrect the dead, I'm not aware of anyone that's alive today that can do this. We're talking about Eliyahu and Elisha, so they lived thousands of years ago and were prophets. And again, I assume if anyone knows how to do this, they're not telling anybody. But he's saying that this ability doesn't come through a messenger, an agent like an angel. It comes through a direct connection and very closeness to God. When a person is so close to God, he can draw forth life from the source of life. He's saying that attribute is connected to Hashem more than anything else. That's what Kedusha is. Kedusha is connecting to Hashem and being that close to Hashem. Okay. And that's what the Brisa ends. This whole book was built off of a Brisa, a Tanoic teaching, and it finished. Holiness brings to Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh and Ruach HaKodesh, the ability to receive messages from Hashem, leads to the resurrection of the dead. Okay, and with that, we're going to finish for today. And again, today's class was in the merit of an Eloi Nishmaso and a Toli Rabbe Tzudak Ben Leib. And I want to thank again for Gedalia Myaskovsky and his family for sponsoring. And next time, actually, is going to be the last class because we're almost done with Mesil Shasharm. We started about probably 2 years ago, maybe a little more. And next week is our last class. So I hope everyone can join us. Or next week, next time, whenever we do it. Wishing everyone a beautiful and uplifting day.